all of us may not be here in order to make full use of our time. I think we are all aware that one of the most sensitive and most critical issues in the field of human relations relates to the whole matter of law enforcement and the delicate question of the role of the police in the matter of their protection of people and property. This has been brought sharply into focus in relationship to riots, but probably more sharply still in relationship to some observations that were made by a mayor of a city about 500 miles from here with respect to what police ought to be doing in the case of the critical test in this matter. I'm not going to be doing any speaking to this subject. I'm simply, I think, to introduce some of the members of the panel who will open up the discussion and give us a chance to think together with them about this important matter. There have been some changes in the personnel of our panel. Mr. Douglas Hall, the attorney whom many of you have known personally, and some of you have read about a good deal before, but perhaps saw the interesting story of this man in last Sunday's paper. We'll open the discussion, present some of the issues, and the other two members of the panel, Larry Harrell from the Minneapolis Civil Rights Department, and Corty Espangoga from South High may be brought into the discussion. Gary Hines from the Determined Ebony Council of Youth at Central High School.
No, we're not.
At Central High School? No, not at Central High School. I get the information from somebody else. All right. And I think I'll introduce Doug Hall first, and then he will introduce the other members of the panel. Is that all right? Mr. Hall.
How long do you want me to? 15? Is that all right? Around fine.
I want to get something off my chest to start out with. It has nothing to do with law enforcement. I didn't bring it along with me, but the letter I got inviting me to this session, and my feelings about the tone that some speakers take when they come to college groups is kind of all wrong. As I recall the letter, it said that the students at Augsburg never lived in the ghetto, and they didn't know what it was all about, and it was our responsibility to come out and get you involved. Speakers feel that they have to arouse your feelings of guilt and so forth to appeal to you in this whole situation. I think that's wrong. I see a lot of your generation. I've got 5 kids of my own that kind of span your generation on both ends. And I think you're beautiful people. And I don't think you should feel guilty about this whole situation. I think you should become involved. You should become involved from a sense of responsibility. But I don't think you should feel guilty. And I think there are certain hang-ups in these guilt feelings that people try to put on your generation. And they cause you to become hung up on things. And you can carry out your responsibility, which you obviously have, much better, if you look at it in terms of responsibility and not that you're guilty for all of the sins of the prior generation. Because all you have to do really is to look at the history of this country for about the past 3 or 4 or 5 years, and college students have accomplished tremendous changes in policy and in feeling and awareness. And as a group, you've done more than the older folks have to redirect a lot of the thinking in this country. So I think you should be proud of yourselves. You shouldn't feel guilty. Come on in and get involved and all that stuff, but do it from the right basis. Law enforcement in the ghettos. You start now with a problem in the ghetto. It was most universal up to 2 or 3 years ago, and it still goes on, that a ghetto is the place to channel all of the things that you don't want in the other part of the city. And the general attitude of law enforcement was, we don't care much what goes on in the ghetto as long as they do it to each other. If they get out of the ghetto and do it to the rest of the community, then we'll have to take some action. You can imagine what that kind of a official policy has done to the ghetto. It's embittered people, it has made them frustrated, depressed, with a very strong feeling that they have no worth and that they are the dregs of society in their areas in the city as the dumping ground. And this has led to all sorts of ramifications. I don't think there's any question, and I'm sure you studied in your sociology courses, that the poor and the black and the red are more vulnerable to police action. The police feel that with impunity they can push people around in the ghetto and nothing will ever happen about it. And there is a completely negative feeling in the ghetto about justice and law and order. These are not relevant things to people who live in the ghetto. And I can illustrate it best by the attitude along Franklin Avenue in the Indian community, that almost universally, if an Indian is arrested for anything, 9 times out of 10 he will go down to court, he will plead guilty just to get it over with, that there's no sense in trying to do anything about it. And of all the injustices, I suppose I feel this one the most keenly, that Indian people and black people have such a completely defeatist idea about justice, because this is what my profession is supposed to be about. About a year ago, 3 Indians were arrested on Franklin Avenue and charged with 4 offenses. And it was a sort of the routine bag that the police department had engaged in. But they just happened to pick out the wrong 3, because these men decided that it was about time to put an end to going down and pleading guilty and getting it over with. That they wanted their day in court. And they wanted their day in court without any real expectation that they would win. But they decided to call a halt for their own integrity to this idea of just going down and falling in the bay. And so we tried 3 cases. It took us 2 days. I sometimes have the reputation of trying a misdemeanor case like a first-degree murder case. But this is important. Instead of just standing up in front of the judge and having the thing over in about 3 minutes, They sit at the council table. The witnesses are sworn. They get to participate in the dignity of what the law is supposed to be about. And you can see the response of a human being to the sort of pride of participating in a process and doing it on their own terms. And that experience sort of started a new awareness in the community as to what justice can be. And it really was unimportant that in those 4 charges they happened to win 3. It was a fine thing to have happen. But the important thing was that they decided that they were going to at least participate as human beings. And it's from beginnings like that that this curse of the ghetto is going to be broken. And it's in areas like that that you as individuals can participate. There are all sorts of ways and organizations and movements in which you can become involved. Not with the idea of working out your guilt, but with the idea of acquiring a whole new world of experience. And it's a constant learning process. I've been talking recently about racism in the administration of justice, and one of the areas in which it's most manifest is in just the semantics of the situation and the words we use. At the Hennepin County Bar Luncheon, in which we talked about this thing, sitting at the speaker's table and engaging in the chit-chat before the program began, the term colored boy was used again and again. Here we were sitting down to discuss racism, and these men are so insensitive to a very elemental proposition, that a man is a man, and you address him like that. But it's a constant learning process, and I made one of the worst goofs I ever made in my life. About 10 days ago, I was engaged in a discussion before a group on the north side, and I was complaining about the particular organization that it hadn't carried out its program. And one of the things I was most concerned about, that in the period immediately after the assassination, it hadn't done anything to reduce the tensions, whereas organizations like the Way, TCOIC, Sabathani Center had organized the patrol and developed it. And I was talking about the fact that this gave us a bad image in the eyes of black people, that we were staying out of things. And then I proceeded to say, and this is the blackest mark our organization has got. Ossie Davis, a very fine actor, made an analysis of dictionary words. And he categorized the words having the connotation of black or blackness as to the positive and negative. And the words black or blackness that have a negative connotation are about 3 to 1 over the positive. So we have built in our own vocabulary a racist element. And I used it just like that. And it's this learning process that's the most exciting thing about the work in the movement. And if I were you, I'd look at it in that sense. A way to broaden horizons, to acquire richness in your lives. And when, with the resources that you bring in, particularly within that context, then we'll get on with the problems. And that's what we need, because the racist element is so deeply embedded. In the administration of justice, in addition to the police problem, when a minority person goes into court in Minneapolis anyway, they go into almost a completely white world. In Hennepin County, the only black faces they see are the bailiffs in the courtroom or deputy sheriffs who represent power. And there's a black man who is on the county attorney's staff. It just happens that he does a good job. And he is a good prosecutor. As a matter of fact, the Hennepin County Attorney's Office is one of the best prosecuting offices that I know of. But here again, all the black faces connected with administration of justice in Hennepin County are on the prosecution side. When you're found guilty and you're referred to probation, there are some there. But while you're in the process of vindicating your innocence of a charge, you're in a white world. Except for the black people on the side of enforcement. And when you pick a jury, you're in about a 99% white world. I defended a man some time ago charged with 2 traffic offenses, and he lives about 600 block off of Olson Highway in North Minneapolis. Lived there all his life. And when we got through picking the jury, there wasn't anybody closer to the core city than about 48th Street. And 2/3 of the jurors lived in the suburbs. All white, obviously. He took one look at that jury and said, I thought I was entitled to a trial of jury of my peers. These people aren't my peers. This is one of the most difficult things we're having to deal with now, because the justification for the selection of juries, this is practically universal, is that it's by lot. You go down the city directory and you take the 4th name on page 20. Then you turn to page 28 and you take the 4th name on page 28. You go through the directory that way and you get a couple of hundred names. They make up your jury panel, and it's perfectly fair because nobody is picked for one reason or another. It's just chance, and so you get a fair jury. Well, this is nonsense. This is one of the greatest unrealities of the law. But it's almost impossible to see the men who've grown up with that system recognize that justice in a jury system means that there will be peers on the jury, and peers means those equal in experience, life experience, have some idea of the problem. Now, this is not to say you are going to have 12 people from the ghetto on every jury that tries a person from the ghetto. But the system should be as much seasoned with that aspect of our community as it is the housewife, businessman, professional man, and so forth. And it's going to be the understanding and the work which your minds will bring to these problems that are eventually going to result in the changes. Because if you can get inside these problems now and not start with all the built-in hang-up that my generation has, for example, then we're going to get into the understanding of why these things are important. And then we'll get some changes. Now, I was to introduce the rest?
Well,
Or are you going to do
the 15 minutes are not up yet. If you have any more.
Well, I'll yield and then we'll get into this.
All right. Now, I wonder which of you gentlemen would like to respond to what Mr. Hall has said first.
Well,
Mr. Larry Harrell.
well, Mr. Hall is my lawyer, but I have to disagree with him. For one thing, is that
Will you speak in the?
yeah. For one thing, I like Doug, and I got to be cool here. Well, Doug, I think that that it is their problem, just as much so And I think they have to be aware of their problem. When you started off, you said that you don't think they have to be hollered at and criticized, you know? But
Can't hear.
see, we've been hollered at and criticized by the police, and we've been abused and misused, and every time we go to court, like you say, you know that there's no justice for us in this courtroom. Yet we can go to court for killing someone, and we'll go to jail for 20 years, and all of a sudden a white man come in and he gets the same treatment, you know. He just goes through the court and he's insane. He's found insane and sent off to St. Peter's for 5 years in this here. And you know, black people get mad and disgusted about this here, and you know, they begin to holler. And can you much blame them for hollering and being disgusted by the way that they've been treated in America? And that's my question.
Gary Hines, would you like to comment on this? Or make some other observation?
Sure. Talked a lot about ghettos. First of all, you have to realize the way people use the word now, ghetto, there aren't enough black people in the state of Minnesota really to make up a ghetto, so you can't really talk on ghetto terms. But staying on the subject we're on now, law enforcement, you see, the problem comes in one simple sentence, phrase, paraphrase, but however you want to put it. The present system by which, you know, we all are supposed to abide puts law and order before justice. Now, if you put justice before law and order would naturally fall in line. However, when you put law and order before justice, there's going to be a little bit of a problem, you see, because as most of you realize by now, if you haven't, shame on you, this is a revolution of people of color, not only in Minneapolis, not only in this country, but all over the world. You see it in Asia, you see it in Africa, South Africa to be specific. You see it right here in our own so-called country. So this is a revolution. One characteristic of a revolution is that it starts within and projects outward. Another characteristic of a revolution, if you know anything about it, is that revolution comes from the word evolution, which means change, revolving. You're changing something. You're turning something around, you see, which is what is happening now, what needs to happen. This country now, especially in its laws, needs to wake up, you know, and be turned around and shook up a little bit. And, you know, we need to dig into the set of values and things we have established now. You see, because the way that things are set up now, they're set up for the white man, for white America. You see, that's why there's so, as far as I'm concerned, there's no such animal as a liberal, you know, no such thing. Because the liberal assumes that everything that's good for America is automatically good for black people. Not so. We have our own culture, we have our own ways. But we're here in America, which is one of the reasons why we're Afro-Americans as opposed to Negro. We'll get into that later on. But in direct conjunction with law and enforcement, the laws are made for you and they're not made for me. Which is why every time you try to put them on me, conflict arises, you see. You're going to put me in a place, for instance, the so-called bag about marriage and black fathers and parents straying. Let's look at it a little bit. Now, you talk about, well, black men are never satisfied. They have to have 2 and 3 women. Well, that's right. You know why? Well, that's your fault too, you see. Because when we were first brought over here, one of the main, to be more correct, functions of certain black men was to serve as studs or bucks. You've heard that word before. If you read any of Kyle Onstott's works, Falconer's Fancy, Mandingo, Drum, Son of Drum, you know what I'm talking about. See, this myth about cotton picking, you know, that was more or less in the minority. The primary job of the black man, especially the well-built black man, you know, a good buck, a good stud, was to serve as a buck, you know, on a breeding farm. And all his pastime was to reproduce, you know, make the baby. This buck will produce a good stud, you know. He's worth $200. He can do so much for you. So what you've done is you've bred 200 or 300 years of promiscuity into us, you know, having 5 and 6 women, and then getting us together, you know, these different studs and bucks, you know, and we'd be talking about, man, in my stable I got 15 females. How many you got? Oh man, I only got 6. You got it good. And then you're going to tell us to adhere to your laws, have one wife. You're going to take us from Africa, and if you know anything about African history, you'll know that it was not uncommon in many tribes, in many areas, for a man to have more than one wife. You see, you're going to give us a religion that really isn't suitable to us or for us. You know, you're going to come down into the desert areas in Africa, into the jungle, especially the jungle, and talk about Christianity and talk about that you're pagan if you don't wear clothes. Hell, if you live in 130 degrees in the tropical forest, what you need clothes for? I mean, you know. So you're putting everything on us that's not befitting of us, including these laws, you see. These laws would be fitting of us if you recognized us as human beings and treated us as such. But you haven't done that. Until now, a lot of people haven't done it, and a lot of people still don't want to do it. A lot of people think they're doing it, they're not doing it. But once again, in direct conjunction with the subject at hand, these laws were supposedly made for Americans. But you don't recognize somebody as American around here unless he's human. He's not human unless he's American, if that makes any sense. And these laws were made by white people, for white people, you see, overlooking the needs of black people. Consciously or unconsciously is irrelevant. The fact is that it was done. And the fact is, today it needs change. We find that out now. You talk about militancy. People wouldn't be militant if they didn't have to be. You talk about pimps, prostitutes, whores of, you know, different degrees. They wouldn't be so if they didn't have to, you know. Black people have never lived in this country. We've only survived, you see. You made it that way for us, you see. Until the 19th century, the Constitution said that we were only 3/5 of a human being. For 125 years, we made 75 cents out of every dollar. You take the country away from the red man, and later tell him that he has to pass a law for him to be a citizen. And then you're going to pass a human rights bill to tell us that we're human, we don't have tails. Like we didn't know that. And then you're going to put laws on us that aren't even of our culture or of our heritage. And then you're going to send a white policeman into our ghetto. Now we've developed a subculture. And you're going to send a white policeman in there and tell us what's right and wrong, you see. When your morals are different from ours, your culture is different from ours, your heritage is different from ours, your beliefs are different from ours in many aspects. And I realize that I'm making a lot of generalizations. However, generalizations are necessary. So, in compliance with what we're saying, many of the laws now that are standing, you know, as they are, must come under some severe changes, and very quickly, you see. Because if these laws were as they are stated, if they are enforced as they're stated, you know, if they were carried out as they are stated, for every one that it is stated about, you wouldn't have the so-called rebellions and things of this nature. Social economic revolutions, they're not riots. This is a revolution. The so-called riots are the rebellion part of the revolution, you see. And then you're going to talk about militants. Hell, we're not militant. Who's militant that goes around burning down buildings? We're just frustrated. You talk about we're lazy. We're not lazy, we're just tired. You've been working for 400 years, you'd be tired too. Now take a look at the Ku Klux Klan running around raping and castrating and bombing little girls. That's militant, you see. They're directing their anguishes and their hatred and their racism at people. They're not going around burning around buildings like we are. But you see, if some of these laws aren't, you know, put into effect and soon, black people are going to start changing their targets from buildings to guess who?
Corty Espangoga, do you like to make some comments from South High School?
Excuse me, I'm not from South High School, so we can get that straight. I'm from the Youth Opportunity Program from the Civil Rights Office. And another thing. Well, I just want to say something about Minneapolis. I'm just talking from Minneapolis. I think they have a great police force. Great. They enforce all the laws on us so good that they get a raise, you know. And this is why your police force is so good. You hear about Minneapolis police force doing this. Everybody on TV, they show them giving these medals out. they're not doing anything but putting it enforcement on my people and me. And as Doug was saying about the courtroom, I mean, Doug's been my lawyer, and he knows, I was fortunate enough that I'm gonna just give you an example. I was walking down the street, me and my friend, and some white boys come by in a car, call us chocolate drops, pull up to the side and tell us, come on, they're gonna do this and that. So there's 3 of them and 2 of us, and to me the size was even, And, even if it wasn't to me, it sure was to the police when they got me. The reason they got me because my friend, he was protecting himself with a weapon, a razor, and see, they started, they come out on the worst end of it, and we get punished for it, and so we were fortunate enough to get away from it. All I was told is that we were wrong, the way it made me feel like that we were just supposed to walk over there, get beat up and call the police, knowing not who these people are, where they come from. But it just got reverse directions. It seemed like some kind of way. Somebody got cut, and somebody got hit with a rock, and I didn't come out with a scratch. And the police threatened to shoot my friend. This is when they got him in the car. I was fortunate enough to get away again. And this is the thing, he gets in the car, they put him in the car, takes out his gun and said, well, I should kill you right here and now. What kind of law enforcement is that, But do you think, now, I think if this was a white person, a black cop would have turned around and told him this, he would have filed all kinds of complaints and sued everybody, but just like the Indian, just like Doug said, they've been taking it, so they just gone plead guilty. My friend didn't say nothing. He just put his head down and went on down to spend 4 days in jail. And some kind of way, by a miracle or somebody did something, we got out of it, And this is the thing, man. If this is so great of a police force and law enforcement and all you judges and attorneys and, well, do we have a chance? This is all I'm gonna say. Can I go in the courtroom with a fair chance? Can I go in there thinking, well, at least I'm thinking I might have that chance, but is it true? Do I have that chance that you might have when you go in the courtroom? See, people, just like he said, you got these people in here on the jury, somebody doesn't know nothing, They just come on in and, well, just like if I think I would have went to court, I wouldn't be standing here right now. They would have told them that I was wrong. There was 3 of them and 2 of us. We outnumbered them. Well, that's what they might as well told me that, since they said they didn't start it. This I just don't understand. How can they come there and tell me I was wrong? I'm get jumped on, protect myself, and I'm wrong. Answer that.
Well, I think the remaining time, we'd like to open the floor for the discussion and questions. And you can address them to any one of the members.
Gary, I'd like to know if you could tell us a little bit more about decoy.
I'd like to have you tell them.
Well, I wouldn't mind doing that, but I'm sure there's other people that want to stick right to the immediate subject. I could tell you that personally. It's nothing that, I'm not saying that I want to publicize, I do. But I'm sure there's a lot of people that want to stick right to the subject of the question.
Perhaps we should pick.
Is that all right?
To see him after the meeting.
Yeah, okay.
Yes. Well, I have several comments. One to you. Now, I realize that there is prejudice in any police force, but I'd like also to point out that it isn't a bed of roses for every white that goes in there also. I realize that you have prejudice against you, but every white person that goes in there isn't going to have it all great.
Can I say so? He's gonna get a better chance than him. Can I say his white?
Yeah, do you want to ask?
It's not for every white, true, but for the poor white person, he's not getting exact treatment I am. But I'm getting worse. I know if I don't get worse than he does, then something, then the police mixed up somewhere upstairs. But I know that white man don't get treated as bad as I do. This is proven facts.
You have to look at it from this simple sentence. The white man or boy, or whoever it may be in the given situation, may be mistreated, by the law, by police officers. But all you have to do is ask yourself why. They're getting treated for various other reasons other than their color. You see, it's the same thing with the poor white. The poor white is not poor because he's white. But in most cases, in almost all cases, the poor black is poor because he's black. And the same goes for mistreatment within law enforcement agencies. He's getting mistreated because he's black, you see.
Right, now that's you were mentioning about this Afro-American type idea. And, well, like Lillian Anthony was talking this morning, she says, the black people, she said, are mixed up as to what to consider themselves. Now, you consider yourself an Afro-American, and some consider themselves colored people, some Negro, some black people.
Well, could I clear that up for you? First of all, and you might as well sit back because it's going to take a little while. First terms first. Now,
You want to stand up so they can hear you? I think some people have some difficulty in hearing. It's that contact again.
first of all, Afro-American and black are not synonymous, but they do not conflict with each other. I'll clear them up later. First one I want to clear up is Negro. Why black people are against the word Negro. Now, all you have to do in 9 out of 10 times in any case like this against anything is just look into the history of it. Now, the word Negro is a Spanish word for black. Now, many of those people that dealt with the slave trade were people of Spanish descent, or Spanish people, Portuguese and Dutch, mainly. And when we were brought to this country, it wasn't realized, that we came from different racial stocks, different tribal stocks, We came from, just to name a few, the Hausas, the Dahomians, the Ashantis, the Fantis, the Ibex, the Crews, and several others. It was just realized we had one thing in common, that we were black. And so they referred to us as Negro. You see, this was their word for black. Now, all right, what's wrong with it? First of all, I'll tell you what the word Negro does. It takes away any identification with any culture or any heritage. You can look on a map of the continent of Africa, and nowhere will you see the word Negro. You can look on the map of the world, and nowhere will you see the word Negro. There is no Negro land. And you see, you constantly hear about the fighting Irish, and the Spanish have Spain, and the Germans have Germany, the English have England. Who the Negroes have? Negro land? Well, where's that at? And you see that right there. The second thing it does is that there has been a stereotype of the word Negro. Quote Malcolm X's autobiography. Malcolm X was third in his class, and being students, you'll note that that's a fairly high percentage. He was third in his class, and he was talking to one of his teachers one day, and his teacher asked him, Malcolm, what do you intend for your profession to be when you grow up? And Malcolm replied, well, I want to be a lawyer. And so his teacher said, well, a lawyer? Well, don't be a lawyer. Why don't you become a carpenter, something more fitting of a Negro, you see? So that's the second thing the word Negro does. And not only takes away culture and heritage, but there's a stereotype with it. The third thing is that to too many people the word Negro means nigger anyway, you see. Now, the insult with the word nigger and Negro comes from this. For 200 or 300 years, black people were niggers in this connotation. The present day definition of the word nigger is a base, low human being, a very vulgar human being. And for 200 or 300 years, while slavery was, reached its height and decline, black people were niggers, fed once a day if the master didn't forget it, cut up his hog and have his ham and toss us the guts and say, here, nigga, eat it. And we were smart enough to turn around and make a delicacy out of it, chitlins, you see. Things of this nature. So, what does it do? It takes away any identification with the culture. There's a stereotype with it, a negative stereotype. And there's an insult to the word, among other things. So that is why the word Negro, many people, black people nowadays, consider it as defunct. Now, colored. Colored means of color. Colored, and when you're talking about human beings, Homo sapiens, you're talking about Hawaiians, you're talking about Orientals, Chinese, Japanese, Tahitians, Mexicans, Spanish, and black people, Africans and Afro-Americans, you see. That is the thing with color, you see. So when you're talking about colored people, you're not talking about us. Colored can also mean of different colors. And if you're going to talk about that color, you're talking about yourself. Because some, places on your skin are pale gray and some are pink. Some are a little bit red here. So, if you're going to talk about color, make sure which connotation you have. Either you're talking about us or you're talking about yourself. Now, as for the word black, when you talk about people relate to the extremes. Nobody in here is white, and yet you're referred to as white people. If I hold up any white piece of paper around here, which we would all agree to as being white, and held it up to your skin, you'd see that you were far from it. But people relate to the extreme. The red man, no Indian is pure red, but they relate to the extreme. Yellow man, same as Orientals, Chinese. You don't see a pure yellow, some close to it, yes, but you don't see that. People relate to the extreme. Now, then comes the question, why haven't black people wanted to be called black? Well, obviously, it's been instilled in their minds that black is bad, Angel food cake is white and devil's food cake is black. Things of this nature, When you're married, you wear white, and when you die, you wear black. As Spike said, it's been put in your mind that black is bad, you see. But now we're starting to relate to our extreme, too. We're saying that black is beautiful. We're redefining our entire sets of values. So that is the word on black. Now, Afro-American. Afro-American is the really correct term because you can't say African because we've been here too long for that. We built this country and we've put too much into it to just say African. Another reason is because 1 out of every 5 black men has had some white ancestors, you see. And the same goes with white people. So we're not pure Africans, if there is any such thing as pure. And so what the word Afro-American does, it restores that identification with a culture or heritage that Negro has taken away. It is the exact opposite of Negro, you see. Now whenever somebody is called a Negro, it's meant in a derogatory way, you see. So that is what the word Afro-American does. It restores some of that which has been taken away, and it is the only really correct term when you're talking about nationalities. Like I said, the Spanish have Spain. The Afro-Americans have what? Well, they put too much in this country to just back out and say we just have Africa, you see. Africa is the heritage and culture we relate to. However, we still are, and we're not technically, but people like to think of us, we like to think of ourselves to some extent as Americans. So you have Afro-Americans. Then comes to the final part, what about this myth about oids, this OID, Africanoid, Australoid, Caucasoid, Mongoloid. You see, you've even tried to slip racism in there. You're going to call, now first of all, let's get something straight. The word race is only 350 years old, approximately. And it came as a substitute or was synonymous to the word family. Like you look in the Bible, you see the family of Shem, the family of Mo, the family of this one, the family of that one. You see, race meant family. Now, when you're talking about Caucasoids and Mongoloids and things of this nature, you were not referring to skin color. Caucasoid or Caucasian comes from the Caucasus Mountains, you see, in Europe. As a result, there's black Caucasians, you see. But people have used the political term, you see. Mongoloid, that comes from the area in Asia, referred to as Mongolia. There were a few scattered tribes of black people there, so as a result there's black Mongolians, there's white Mongolians. You see, but people have used color as a border, you see. But even such, you still try to take something away from us. You call the group in Mongolia Mongoloids. They had some place to relate to. You call the Caucasians Caucasoids. They had some place to relate to. And then you're going to call the people from Africa Negroids? Come now. Africoids or Africanoids or Afroids, something like that. Something where you have something tangible to relate to, but not something way off base. So does that take care of that African Negro colored bit?
All right. Thank you. I think we should try to get the questions directed primarily now to the questions of law enforcement. Yes.
I think in your first talk, you pointed out 2 things. First of all, that it was unjust treatment once someone was a Negro or an Afro-American was caught. But you also said that there was injustice in the laws that you had to abide by. And I'm curious, I guess I just don't know what exact laws don't apply. You know, I don't know which laws you consider not applicable to you.
Well, it's like this. Maybe you took me wrong when I said it. You have to realize, now let's look at the Constitution, the basis for all of our laws, right? You agree with me there? Constitution, all right? Now, the Constitution was made for human beings, American human beings, right? However, consider at that time, black people were not considered as human beings because that same Constitution told us that we were only 3/5 of a person, you see. So therefore, none of the laws apply to us really, except the so-called Jim Crow legislation and the slave codes. But now, as to modern day things tangible, something you can relate to right today, like I said, one of those is this so-called myth about changing your whole philosophy. After 6,000 years of glory in Africa, living under our own cultural ways, you're going to tell us about this one white bit and adhere to this and adhere to that. In other words, what you're doing is you're penalizing us, and then you're oppressing us, and then you're asking us why don't we speak, and then when we do speak, you're asking why are we speaking, you see. So it's a merry-go-round like that, you see. Now what I'm talking about in direct compliance to your question is you're talking about what laws don't relate. I'm not going to go into specific laws. I saw the man give the time signal. But what it is first of all, black people have to be recognized as human beings, you see. What one law is good for, like I said, the so-called liberal, there is no such animal because many of them assume that what's good for America, white America, is automatically good for black America. Not so, you see. So until we're recognized as human beings, then maybe the laws will start applying.
I am in a very uncomfortable position of having to follow orders. Now, I don't know whether you follow orders or not in this case like this, but I was told that there is a movie shown at 4 o'clock in another part of the building, and then the Dudley Riggs show at 4:30. And I'm wondering if instead of just following the orders, we might cut the thing for those who wish to go to the movies can go to the movies, and those who wish to stay on a little longer here with the gentlemen that have come to talk to us about law enforcement can stay. Does that seem like a reasonable solution? So, yes.
I just think the film is the detached Americans. I suppose those who want to see that could go to the film and
Yes.
being aware of what the film is now.
Yes.
And those who want to stay have seen that before.
Yes. Thank you. The Detached Americans is the name of the film, and I assume that some of you may have seen it before. So I guess we'll just go on with the question of those who wish to leave. Now, Mr. Augrey had his hand up a long time ago, and I'd like to recognize his question.
I would like to direct my comments and question primarily to Mr. Hines. It seems, as I interpret the statements which he has made, that there are laws and there are laws, some of which he might agree with and others which he will not agree with. Let us admit right off the bat that the laws of America are not equitably utilized, they are not enforced, or they might be enforced at the whim of the officials. But it is scarcely tolerable to accept a statement to the effect that the laws of America are not to be applied to the Afro-Americans. If you are Americans, you're going to live by American laws. The unfortunate thing then is, I think, the probably enforcement of the laws, and probably a harsher treatment. But I can assure you that white people are harshly treated too. I think we'll have to accept if you're an American, you're going to live by American laws.
True. However, if you're going to enforce one law, enforce all of them, you see. Now, we're in a pretty unique situation. I see what you're getting at. You know, live in America, go by American laws. Now, you're just the people that aren't doing it, you see. People here, you got people talking about why you shouldn't have open housing when all of the land is supposed to be accessible by all of the people. These are the people that shouldn't be here because They don't want to adhere to the so-called American ways. Now, in application to the black man, he'll enforce one law against the black man, and when it comes to a white man, not so, you see. This is what I'm referring to.
I grant that, and I feel equally harshly against many of our judges, some of whom I've had contact indirectly, I must admit, but still rather directly. I think they're a bunch of hoodlums who ought to be in jail in part. But still, it is their law to enforce, or their task to enforce the law, and I suppose there must be a certain amount of equitable treatment too, no matter what the race.
Yes, but then, like I said, the root of it. Justice before law and order. See, they're not doing that. They're putting law and order before justice. Justice is supposed to be what's right, what's correct. In any, applicable sense. They're putting law and order before justice.
Would Mr. Hall like to comment on the relation between justice and law and order? I think this is such a critically important issue that perhaps you'd like to raise it as a legal specialist.
Well, I'd really like to comment first on another aspect of it. Maybe you saw in the Star 10 days, 2 weeks ago, a Harris poll on alienation, which gave a breakdown in 4 or 5, 6 categories, 1966 and 1968, how the black community felt as to their acceptance or rejection in various aspects of society. And in those 2 years, the feelings of rejection had, the people who had the feelings of rejection, alienation, increased about 100% in almost all of the categories, between 75 and 100%. What you've heard this afternoon from the black man on the program is their feelings of alienation and rejection, that they don't have a part in the system. And here you have the roots of the riot and the disturbance. And the whole burden of the riot and the disturbance is then by society put back on the black community. This is your wrong, you're responsible for it, and you've got to find the solution for it. And so we're just running around in a circle. The real cause of the riot and the disturbance and the destruction, which is this alienation and rejection, isn't coped with at all. And it's perfectly well to say that in America you have to abide by the American laws. But the injustice is so cumulative now, and the frustration is so great that that is no longer relevant to the black community. And unless we come to grips with that and tackle first the job of making the law relevant to the black community and making justice relevant to the black community, then we're going to get at the cause of the riot and the disturbance and the rest of it. And Mr. Hines is perfectly correct. The emphasis on law and order misses the point. You attack it from the point of view of justice, and then law and order becomes relevant. And until us white folks can get over this bag, and the institutions can be adjusted and reevaluated, then we're going to be confronting the symptoms of irrelevancy. And this is a discouraging thing. In the spring of '68, the issuance of the Riot Commission report, the assassination of Dr. King, these apparently are passing phenomenon as far as the white community is concerned. They're too swiftly forgotten, and they're talked to death, and they're studied to death, and all this stuff, and we never get down with it. And until we get that word justice up on top to permeate down all of this, we're in trouble. Yes.
I'd like to ask a question, Mr. Paul. It seems that within this police system that we have a rather inherent racism, because the type of person that is employed for the policeman job is a person who has to meet physical standards. He's probably played violent football in high school. He's been in the Army for 18 years. And it's this type of person. Would you comment on that? Is that generally...
You're absolutely right. There's some beginning to cope with this. They're trying to get at the real psychopathic personality by administering the psychological tests so that they could weed out at that area. You have an increasing reliance on at least some college training, if not a degree. Those are all ways to get at that. But it's going to take a long time, and the thing that you put your finger on is going to be the dominant characteristic of the police force sometime.
I think Walla has...
Yeah, I have a question for you, Mr.
Yes.
Hall. I think it's relevant. I don't know if it'll put you on the spot or not. It's something that Ron Edwards mentioned earlier today, that you might face some repercussions from the Bar Association or from some other lawyers, dealing with this sort of thing, judges association, for the stand you're taking, the work you're doing with these charges of racism in the court systems, the jury systems, and so on. I want to know if you can comment perhaps on the Bar Association and on any progress they might be making so far as not liberalizing, but coming around to some of the real problems that do exist within the structure.
Well, I appreciate the question. I don't feel it puts me on the spot at all. The bar, obviously, is one of the most conservative segments of society. Always has been, and probably always will be. However, within the bar, there are contrary currents. Some of the great moments of the bar have been men whose background and training would contraindicate their participation in matters of human rights. But there have been outstanding men who have risen to the occasion. And there's a great deal of ferment right now. I may be biased. I would say at the bar session that we had this discussion of racism at, I would say at least 50% responded positively. 95 of the 50% were young men. This is part of the problem. But there's a ferment going on, and there's a ferment going on the bench. One judge on the municipal bench has for weeks now been attending classes in Afro-American studies, and he is directing his efforts to involve other members of the bench. We're going to make a similar effort directed at the bar. When I proposed the idea of this discussion of racism in the administration of justice, the president of the Hennepin County Bar Association responded not only well, but just like that. We will always lag, I think. It's part of our bag, but it's not completely black, and there I go. It's an area in which if the rest of the community will zero in on the bar and keep reminding us that after all your responsibility is not law and order but justice, and keep the pressure on us, the younger men will eventually carry the day. In answer to the thing you mentioned at first, reprisal, I don't anticipate that.
Yes.
You mentioned Afro-American studies for the judges. I wondered to what extent you feel that by teaching white people about Afro-American studies to the judges, what's the goal here? Is this going to reduce some sort of prejudice, or what's the idea behind it?
This will get at the heart of the prejudice, and here it gets back to Mr. Hines' point. If by getting into Afro-American studies, the result is that judges will begin to look at people as human beings regardless of, then you get at the heart of it.
Do you think this should start at the college level, or do you think it should start younger, or what's the ideal here?
Well, it starts in the family. For example, if you don't mind a personal reference, I came out of a family and a social climate in which I never heard the words Negro or Jew. It was always nigger and kike. And it was through my high school experience that I began to get over that. As a result, our children started 25, 30 years ahead of where we started. And if, I suppose some of you may have come from families where the stereotype and so forth is the order of the day. To the extent that you're here now, you're working out of it. And as your families come along and so forth, we'll eventually get to it.
Yes, Mr. Hall, what kind of reforms would you propose to the jury system? As you talked about, how would you envision setting it up so that there would be such a
I hate to reveal my ignorance, but after I spoke at the Bar Association, I was in last Sunday's paper. The Congress has passed a Jury Reform Act for federal courts. And there's a story about it from the New York Times service. And all of the existing systems which don't encompass this core have to be scrapped. And there has to be a deliberate attempt when you select your overall jury panel that it is representative of the community socio-economic strata. But if your overall jury panel is built that way, then you've got a chance. One thing you run into now, and this was used in the meeting, they say that the Negro population in Minneapolis is 2%. We have 2% on our juries, therefore it's fair. This is a numbers game, because the things that lead to crime result in many more than 2% of the defendants in the criminal system being black or poor or Indian. So the numbers game falls apart there. We're going to make an interesting effort here. The jury system, selection system in Hennepin County is done by rule of the court. The justices of the bench administrates it. So we're going to make an effort to get a group of lawyers together and petition that this new federal policy be applied to Hennepin County as a matter of judicial rule. And this is going to put it right to the bench. And we'll see what happens. Yeah.
We heard earlier today about unequal opportunities for employment for Negroes in various professions and crafts, trades. How does this stack up in, for example, the Bar Association for admittance of Negro attorneys to the bar?
I think by and large it's clear that the law schools have not paid enough attention to the problems of the black student coming into an alien atmosphere and an alien system. And so that the push-out process, the burden, the academic burden, hasn't been recognized. And it's particularly true out here. One of the most inspiring things that I've ever been to was conferences of the NAACP Legal and Educational Fund that for years have brought black men out of the South, supported them through the northern law schools, then they go back into the South to practice. And this is one of the greatest group of men I have ever seen in my life. And this program has paid off, and they're back in the South carrying on the fight. Although one of the strangest things I ever saw was that same conference was a lawyer, black, who looked and sounded like Everett Dirksen. And if you can imagine anything more incongruous than that, I can't appreciate it.
I'm sorry, but I think we're going to have to call the meeting to a halt. There is, as you know, a Douglas Riggs Brave workshop, new workshop presentation.